I am so pleased to be with you all today to be talking about this very exciting year. The astrology of 2023 is what we're going to be talking about today. And we have some significant planetary cycles this year that are setting us up for big transitions, big changes that are happening between now and 2026. So this is when things get really exciting. You know, we had 2 years to get adjusted, 3 years to get adjusted to the 20s, and you know, they came in with a bang. And so now we're balancing out some of the post-pandemic life, or if we can even call it post. We're not quite 100% out of this time yet. So we're finding a new normal, finding a new balance, and within that, there's a lot of creative potentiality. And we're really going to see this year catalyzing a lot of events, a lot of movements culturally that are going to take us into the peak, the most interesting transits of this decade happen in 2026. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. Today, we are going to, I'll start off with just giving a little review of 2022. And I encourage you to go back and watch that and see, you know, how much of this made sense. And because we're building on what happened in 2022 with these planetary cycles that are starting and kicking us off in 2023. So then we'll talk about those larger planetary cycles. In particular, Saturn's move into Pisces, Pluto's move into Aquarius. This is the big one. This is the biggest transit that's happening this year, and actually in the entire decade. Then we're going to be looking at Jupiter's move into Taurus, and the North Node moves into Aries. So these are all brand new cycles that are beginning. And so I'll guide you through what they mean. We'll kind of start with painting some broad brushstrokes, but then I'll get really practical and talk about how these will define our, the generation coming up and our culture moving forward. Then I'll go into the retrogrades. Everyone wants to know about the retrogrades. Mercury retrograde, Venus is going retrograde this year. Mars is retrograde right now and through the beginning of January. So we'll talk about what that means and what to expect. Finally, we'll close with the eclipses. We have 4 eclipses each year, sometimes 5. And the eclipses, because they activate the north and south nodes, which are really points that relate to what we're integrating and healing from the past, and what we're building and what we're prioritizing for the present and into the future. So because eclipses involve the nodal axis, the eclipses really pinpoint what kind of the bigger ongoing themes of this year. And usually big shifts in our personal lives happen around the time of eclipses. And if those eclipses activate really sensitive points in your chart, then you might expect some big changes. So we'll talk about those eclipses. And finally, I'm going to close with just giving you a few highlights that you can mark on your calendar. So that's what we'll talk about today. I've broken down a few themes for this year. One is that we are really healing on all levels. And I'm seeing this a lot in my client practice right now. And in particular with people who have children, who have had mental health challenges throughout COVID, with, so many of us have lost loved ones. We're still at the tail end of the pandemic. And right now, as we're recording this, there's a whole new resurgence of COVID. People are being hospitalized again. And so while we're no longer wearing masks, many of us, we're still navigating this collective grief, this collective trauma. And so this 2023, it's like we're coming out of that period of mourning and starting to get to that place. Anytime I've been in a grieving process, I love David Kessler's concept of the 5 stages of grief, adding to the end, that eventually you get to a place where you can find meaning out of that experience of loss or out of that experience of grief. And I see 2023 as being that time. When we talk about Saturn and Pisces in just a few minutes, we are going to detail some of the ways in which that cycle relates to health, relates to the healthcare industry, relates to our overall well-being. But I can say that mental health is going to be a big priority. And we can see this already with all of the movements that are taking place right now within the mental health care industry, and within that, the practice of mental health. We're even seeing that with psychedelic research and ketamine clinics and things like that. And this is something that I think we're going to see even more throughout 2023. We're also healing systems. And this is important because a lot of what has come to the surface about the injustices that we're facing in our world, a lot of that has sort of come out of the closet. It's up. But do we really have workable solutions? And really what's underlying so much of that injustice is trauma, collective trauma. And for some groups of people, it's worse than others. And so I think 2023 is going to be a move toward righting some of those injustices. And we're already seeing a little foreshadowing of this right now. It's evidenced by, we're making moves toward reparations, for example. We've done a lot to take down statues, metaphoric and literal, of outdated ways of thinking, of ways that we have, built. This culture has been built on the backs of people who have really struggled. And so we're going to see a lot of that, those systems, those power systems starting to shift. Pluto moves into Aquarius, as we just talked about, and as we're going to get to in just a few minutes. And Pluto is the planet of power. And in particular, it relates to our understanding of power on personal level, as well as on a socio-political level. So when Pluto enters Aquarius, anytime Pluto moves into a new sign, we can call out corruption in the areas related to that sign. And we have an opportunity to restructure our lives and restructure the world. So this is going to be something that we're going to be seeing a lot in 2023. But we just get little foreshadowings of it. Everything that's happening now plants the seeds for what's happening in 2024 and up to 2026. More being, less doing. This is something that I think is going to be a big theme that we're moving into. Not right away. I think we're going to see it more in the summer months. What we're moving from is, as Pluto leaves Capricorn, where it's been since 2008. Capricorn is the sign of industry, productivity. It's the sign of corporations, of achieving goals. And we're starting to move from that sort of hierarchical, ambition-driven way of being to experiencing or wanting to experience more freedom. And so what does it look like to be in a 4-day work week? What does it look like to prioritize spending time with your family rather than, working on your side hustle? And I think this is going to be a shift that we can thank Saturn in Pisces for. Finally, we have a lot of signatures this year. Actually, this whole decade, we have a lot of signatures that are similar to what we had during times of cultural renaissance, and the Renaissance in particular. So we're going to see these continue to see innovations in art, in the sciences, in space exploration. We're going to be, I think, looking at ways to ground technology in a physical experience. I think we'll see more things like biomimicry. There's a whole wave of innovation that we are on the precipice of. And so I think it's going to be a really exciting time for music, for the arts, for the ways that we can have interactive filmmaking through AI, through virtual reality. I think our experiences of the arts are going to be immersive. And this is going to be something that is just going to be really exciting to witness, to be a part of. And anyone who is working in the arts or in film, or anyone who's building theaters or creating these experiences, it really is about bringing technology into a visceral experience. So less about our social media and more about our communities, our local communities, and having these kinds of IRL, these in real life experiences. And so I think these are some of just the overarching themes that we're going to see this year. But let's go back and look at 2022 and just kind of get a little retrospective. And I'll go pretty fast through these because I know we want to get into the juicy planetary cycles of 2023. But the big transit that we had in 2022 was the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction. And Jupiter is the planet of faith. It's the planet of our philosophy, our sense of our worldview, our collective worldview. And Neptune is the planet of mysticism and dreams and wonder and curiosity. It's the planet of the creative impulse and universal love, boundaryless love. And so these two planets came together, and there was an awakening of compassion. This happened on April 12th and of 2022. And there was, a real resurgence there has been, leading up to this, a resurgence in supernatural mysteries, dream work. It sort of awakened hope for us. Some of the challenges of this conjunction, though, were, we've had conspiracy theories, we've had fanaticism, we've had questions about what's true or what's not, what we can believe. And so we're coming on the heels of that and really still trying to find our bearings, still trying to uncover, what is true. Inflation is one of those byproducts of Jupiter and Neptune. When you have these two planets coming together, it kind of dissolves the boundaries that we have. And so this year is going to be a lot about creating containers for our spiritual practices, creating containers for capping inflation and addressing inflation on a global level. I'm not just talking about here in our country. So this is one of the big transits that we had. And the other significant thing that has been happening is every 248 years, Pluto comes back one full circle, one full revolution around the sun. And so in 2022, we've had our US Pluto return. And this is something that, so the transiting Pluto is back at the same place it was at the birth of our country, which a lot of astrologers use a chart for July 4th, 1776. And anytime a planet comes back to the same place it was at our birth, or at at the birth of our country, or any cycle repeats itself. It's a time when we start a whole new cycle related to that planet. So the US Pluto return, we often revisit themes that were taking place at that time. And so if we look at what those themes are and what we've seen present itself this year, the US Pluto is at the late degrees of Capricorn. And which Capricorn relates to boundaries and borders. It also relates to corporations and the economy, economic systems, and government. And so the US Pluto return is something that we're still going to be feeling for the next 2 years, even though it has been exact 3 times. And by the time you see this, it will have been exact 3 times. The first one in February, the second one in July, and the last exact conjunction will be on December 28th of 2022. And so we don't even quite know what this new cycle is about, but a few things that we have seen that coincided, a few events that have coincided with these exact conjunctions have been, we've seen a lot about the January 6th insurrection, and big milestones in those hearings happened right around the times of the Pluto return. And so really, I think redefining what is democracy, and who gets away with what, and what do we do to balance out the polarity in our country. And so we don't have resolution for any of these things. Other things that we have seen with the US Pluto return here in this country, I realize some people might be listening from other countries as well. But the other things that we have seen, we've seen corruption raise its head, and so we've been able to call it out, in particular in institutions, in corporations, in a lot of the social structures that we live in, and so. And one of the ways this has presented itself is actually in the conversation about reproductive health and reproductive health care and abortion in this issue in the Supreme Court. And so again, these are still talking points, but these events and the ways that the news stories that have come out and the ways that we are addressing some of these concerns relate to how do we redefine our values, building from what we came from, but then also moving forward into the future. And so this is a really pivotal time for us. And it's something that because it happens once every 248 years, it's not just setting us up for next year or the year after. It really is starting a whole new way for us moving forward for the next 248 years. So we are going to see a lot of, I see that all of the decisions that have been made, all of the policies that have been put into place on a national level, I can see all of these being building blocks for ways that we think about justice, or ways that we think about taxation without representation. Some of those themes that were up at the American Revolution that caused us to originally, split from England and King George and establish our own republic. Now, I could do a whole lecture about this because it's so interesting to me. But the other thing that is going to be that's happening is that not just that a lot of states actually were formed around the late 1700s. And so each state is going to have its own Pluto return as well. And so I think some of the states that were brought into the Union a little bit later might not have as much upheaval or as much change. I think there's going to be a little bit of a ripple effect that takes place throughout the country as we are moving forward into this cycle nationally, and then as each state has its own Pluto return. The other transit that we had in 2022, that was also in 2021, was Saturn square Uranus. And I know I talked about this in our last one, but really this transit is all about celebrating what's desirable from the past and letting go of what's not so desirable. It's really been a tension of, the old way of being, the tried and true. This is how we've always done it. And the new invention. What kind of innovative ideas can we bring forward in building a path for the future? So this has been a tension that we've all been feeling. And one of the ways this has been playing out, Saturn square Uranus is often a transit that coincides with big movements in labor. For example, when we've had unions being formed, the New Deal legislation, all of those kinds of ways of balancing out, supporting workers and people who are on the ground doing the work. And so this is one of the ways. The Great Resignation has been a part of this. And also just infrastructure, rebuilding, patching up old structures, old buildings, tearing down old statues. These have been the outer manifestations of this transit. And in our personal lives, it's been a lot of sitting with your, family members at a kitchen table, having ideological differences and conflict around those. Maybe walking away or separating from people because of those ideological differences, and then really determining, is it in your best interest to build a bridge and to go back, or is it more in your best interest to move in a new direction? And so this has been one of perhaps the more painful ways I've seen this transit play out in people's lives. We've also had big changes in terms of our economy and economic structures. And this has to do with the North Node in Taurus and the eclipses that happened in Taurus and Scorpio this year. And a real priority, almost like a revisiting what kinds of new ways of thinking about economic systems and money and wealth, and how we earn money. All of these things have been sort of in the background, rippling up. We're still not out of that North Node in Taurus transit, and so we still haven't quite gotten to the other side where this is all makes sense. But usually there's an 18-year cycle that relates to our economic cycles, and in particular the stock market. And right when that North Node, we hit a high point usually around, when the North Node is in Leo, Cancer. And then when the North Node enters Taurus, we start to shift. And so we move more into a bear market. And this is I'm not a financial astrologer specifically, but I am aware of these cycles, and I've been tracking them for a number of years. So, and so that's usually when we start to see a shift. And so I'm not saying, I don't think we're going into a major recession right now. I think this is kind of a balancing out, leveling, getting our bearings. But I can see perhaps some pulling back in terms of how we're spending, or in terms of, interest rates being high, not being able to borrow as much. And so I could see everyone sort of tightening up a little bit, and exercising a little bit of restraint. We don't have that Jupiter, Neptune hope and optimism and everything is possible like we had in the beginning of 2022. And that's something that we'll see, that we're going to continue to see just a little tightening as we move into 2023. And now we'll get to those planetary cycles. Let's start with Saturn. And Saturn is the farthest planet that the ancients could see without a telescope. They didn't have telescopes at the time. And so they thought that Saturn was the boundary, was the end of the universe. And so Saturn represents that sense of our limitations. It's the boundary line that we can't cross, the rules that we can't disobey. It relates to structure and discipline. And it's also what we are in our personal lives here to master. Transiting, and we know now that Saturn, that there are other planets, that the universe goes on and on outside of Saturn's domain. So I always think that this is like our perceived limitations. And I want to credit that concept to Georgia Stathis, who is an incredible astrologer, and I always love giving credit. But she has Business Astrology 101 is the book where that concept, where I learned that concept. So I'm passing it on to anyone who wants to dig a little bit deeper. So I love to think of Saturn in that way. And so transiting Saturn, it shows us where we're doing the hard work. It's like, these are the things that aren't coming easy. And just to give you some context, transiting Saturn has been in Aquarius. And think about what's happening. Aquarius rules the internet, it rules social media, it rules the tech industry. So think about what's been happening just this year with Twitter, with Facebook, even with some of these virtual reality companies. Tech, it's like we're having to impose restrictions and limitations. There are conversations about what's free speech and what's not. So we're pulling in the reins a little bit with that sector. Well, Saturn moves into Pisces this year, and it happens on March 7th. And it's going to stay in Pisces until May of 2025. Pisces is the sign, it's the last sign of the zodiac, and it's the sign of mysticism, imagination, spirituality. Pisces is boundless. It wants to reach into other realms. It does not want to be limited or contained. And Pisces, of all the signs, is the sign that relates to our intuition, to our sense of connection with the spirit realm, and also our inherent drive to create and to co-create. And so when we have Saturn in Pisces, Saturn is like a container. And so think about, Pisces is a water sign. And Saturn is the sign of structure. And so Saturn's going to allow us to put some parameters around some of those Pisces boundless things. And so we're going to see a real rise in spiritual discipline. And I think that this could be really good for churches. People craving a spiritual practice that's not virtual, that connects them with people in their communities. I think we could also see a rise in transcendental meditation, Buddhism, anything that is allowing us to lean into a practice to develop our mystical, our sense of mystical connection. We're also going to see a new kind of spiritual leadership, and I'm laughing a little bit at this because those who know me know that I was just recently elected to a city council in my area, And this is, I think, what I'm, and I didn't realize it at the time, that this is so much of what Saturn in Pisces is going to be. We've had the religious right very vocal in their in politics. But I think we're going to start to see a new kind of esoteric spirituality. I think we're going to see more, indigenous people rising into elected positions, into elected office, to where we're bringing new representation, new spiritual voices into our leadership in governance and in corporations, in all of those systems that have traditionally been more closed. This is going to make the separation of church and state a little bit tricky in terms of I think it on the one hand, it will open us up to having more conversations about how spirituality and religion plays into leadership or into our governance. But I think on the other hand, it's going to be really important, for us to really be aware of some of the dangers of fundamentalism in terms of how it relates to our political processes. Saturn is going to be meeting up with, so Neptune is also in Pisces, and Saturn and Neptune do this little dance from now until 2026, where they both dance with the North Node a little bit, and they both dance with each other, and they come pretty close, and then they meet up in Aries on February 20th of 2026. You can mark that on your calendar. That's a very big day. That's one of the most significant transits of the decade. And everything that's happening on that day will leave a significant, long-lasting change. It'll be deeply felt, and it'll be on a global level. So this year, when Saturn enters Pisces, it moves into the very last stage of that synodic cycle, which is often one of the most exciting stages for a synodic cycle. So it's kind of like, let's clean up the ways, let's blast open and blast apart the cults. Let's look at how people in spiritual leadership, or people in religious power or authority, are abusing their power, and let's balance that out. And so I think that this year is going to be a lot of that reconstruction. I also put less doing, more being, because Pisces is not, for the last 4 years, 4.5, 5 years, Saturn has been in either Capricorn or Aquarius. And those are hard-working signs, hard-working in Capricorn for personal ambition and for, climbing up to that goal. Saturn in Aquarius for the collective and for being a change agent in the world. Pisces is about, it's about meditating, it's about praying, it's about being in an open space to where we can create, to where we can have those mystical experiences that we can only have when we are allowing ourselves the time and space. So we're going to see a change in work culture with this transit. It's a cultural renaissance, and I want to just reflect back a couple of past Saturn and Pisces examples. So Saturn, and just to give you some context, Saturn's in Pisces until 2026. February of 2026. It kind of dips into Aries a little bit in 2025, in the summer of 2025, but it's back it's fully in Aries in 2026. But Pisces is the sign of the film industry and music and those kinds of creative expressions. And the last time Saturn was in Pisces, it was, Saturn's a 29-year cycle. So it was 1994. And we had the 25th anniversary of Woodstock, and that's when there was a big, huge music festival and a revisiting of that culturally rich, changing event from the 60s. And so I think we could have some of those kinds of things, like new types of film, like I said, film, technology, music, art, immersions. And I think we'll see some of those kinds of things. Also, one of the other things that's going to be a very big talking point in Saturn and with Saturn and Pisces is this topic of water rights. There are a number of lawsuits that are happening all over the West Coast about who owns water. I think we'll see some pretty cool inventions and innovations about water processing, but I think we'll see some difficulties with water supply. This is something that I'm definitely watching here on the West Coast, because we have been in an extended drought, and so water shortage, this is going to be a hot topic. But what's great about Saturn is that it puts strain on a sector. We work out the kinks, and then after that transit, so in 2026, 2027, we have a whole new way of transporting water, of building watershed resources. And I think desalination is probably something that we'll see, the technology improve for that. And so I think that new ways of filtering water will come out of this time, but I don't think it's going to be easy in terms of some of the issues that we have. Also, there could be the opposite problem, which is floods and tornadoes and hurricanes and water events. In 1993, when Saturn was in Pisces, we had the Great Flood of 93. And I was there in St. Louis at the time. I grew up in St. Louis, and we were sandbagging every weekend. And so I think we could have those kinds of water events as well, to where some communities have a surplus of it and some are going without. Just to kind of give you a little historic context, in the past, when Saturn has been in Pisces, we had there were moves to address policing and, in particular, racial profiling. In the 90s, it was the Rodney King, the riots, and those started. Then we also had. Rodney King, the Watts riots were in 1965, and the Rodney King was in 1995. And so I think we could see, this conversation. Saturn rules policing and law enforcement, and Pisces is a more compassionate sign. So I think we'll see some movements, not necessarily defunding the police, as I think that there will be some balancing with how we are punishing and the criminal justice industry. And so I have some hope there for that. We also had big movements in religion in the past. So one of them was in the 90s, there was the Second World Parliament of Religions. And then in 1993, President Clinton signed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act into place. Also, the Church of Scientology received tax-exempt status. And in October in the 90s, Pope John Paul the Sixth visit to New York was covered on all of the major American television network. And he had a big, huge papal mass at Yankee Stadium. And so we have big movements with organized religion. I think personally, this Saturn in Pisces is going to allow more earth-centered, people who are pagan or who have more earth-centered or new age belief systems. I think there are going to be some more organization or more organizing efforts for people with those types of beliefs, coming and creating more structure around their spiritual practices. And then, we also had fanaticism as a part of that. So in the 90s, we had the Oklahoma City bomber, fanatics, cult leaders, cults being broken up. These are some of the things that we've seen in the past with Saturn and Pisces. Also, Pisces relates to healthcare and the healthcare industry, vaccines, drugs, finding solutions for the opioid crisis. Are we going to get there? I think we are. I think that there will be big movements that allow for compassionate treatment. And we're already seeing this in some communities where they have needle exchanges or they have methadone clinics. I think we're going to see more and more of that. To reflect a little bit of the past, in the 90s, when we had Saturn and Pisces, we had the health insurance with HIPAA. That act was set into place. We've also, in the 60s, we had Medicare and Medicaid incorporated into the Social Security Act. We had neighborhood health centers that were established. And so there were big movements in healthcare justice. It would not surprise me if universal healthcare came about, or some kind of universal coverage, or some kind of big shift in our healthcare industry took place in the next few years. I hope it does. Also, I think there could be outbreaks of illnesses, immunity. These are all going to be issues. And I think they're going to be hard on the healthcare industry and on insurance. And so I think some of the regulations and some of the changes and some of the balancing out could be a result of just the response to illness. Let's take a deep breath and move into Pluto. This is the big one. So just put your seatbelt on. This is going to be a ride. So Pluto is the planet of power and power structures. It's the planet of power in our family systems as well. It's also the planet of transformation. And what I mean by transformation is complete rebirth, kind of like a caterpillar turns into a butterfly. That's the kind of transformation I'm talking about. Not just these slight little changes, these great, big, massive shifts that affect us all. Pluto is also death and decay. It's that life cycle. So it's birth, it's rebirth, and death. And Pluto is also, it digs into the underground, goes beneath the surface, and finds hidden treasure. So it's the planet that relates to psychology. It's the planet that relates to actually mining and some fermentation processes, anything that regenerates and renews, that takes something, allows it to change form into something else. Pluto is also related to atomic energy. And it's really interesting that that atomic energy, meaning taking these subatomic particles and recognizing the power within them, and so blowing them up to use their full potential. And so it's interesting that the announcement of the nuclear fusion as a new potential energy source and research in that, it's interesting to me that this discovery comes just months before the Pluto enters Aquarius, because Aquarius relates to air, it relates to invention. It is. I think of Aquarius as like the mad scientist of our zodiac. It sees possibilities that are so far outside of the box that we can't even imagine it would be possible. And that's Aquarius. And so I think while Pluto is in Aquarius, I think this how we think about energy in general is going to be completely transformed, and I could see us really, sort of entering into a quantum universe in a very big way throughout this transit. Aquarius is more humanitarian. Aquarius is the sign of oneness, and recognizing that each one of us plays an individual role within the collective whole. And so how can we be fully ourselves, express ourselves fully, and give ourselves permission to do that, knowing that our individuality is essential for the co-creation of the world, of the universe. And so we're going to see a lot of tension between individual rights and the common good. And at first, we're going to see a polarity of power hungry, greedy, sort of individuals wanting to hold power. We might think of it in terms of dictators, people who have privilege, not wanting to let it go. And then the response to that being communities and groups rising up and being powerful in that. And we're going to see this globally. We'll see this in our families. We'll see this, in our schools, communities. There's a lot of social change. And so, people talk about the age of Aquarius. And I think Pluto in Aquarius is going to usher us into that age in a very practical way. Pluto in Aquarius. Every time Pluto has been in Aquarius, it has been a time of revolution, a time when people rise up and call out the corruption on their oppressors. And we can think about the American Revolution. So the American Revolution was taking place while Pluto was in Aquarius. The French Revolution was happening at that same time. And all over the world, you can track colonized countries starting to recalibrate their sense of power. So you had the colonists and the settlers and the power, the dictators and monarchies, and the people of those places. All of us trying to figure out what are these new normals. And I think we're going to see that with Pluto and Aquarius, with the modern version of colonialism, which is, landlords and tenants and housing rights and who can afford property and foreclosures and, some of little hints of what we got in 2008 when Pluto entered Capricorn. We're not quite finished. We haven't done enough to change those systems, even though we've had major crisis in those systems. We still don't have rent stabilization in some places. We still have questions about, how much do renters have rights and things like that. And housing prices, being in fluctuation. So we haven't quite settled this Pluto and Capricorn, these sets of lessons and this set of shifts. And so Pluto in Aquarius is going to bring us things like, community trusts where we are supporting people to build mortgages or to finance their houses, where we have a better sense of oneness. So it's not those people over there, it's seeing how we're all connected, and still being connected and being independent, seeing how our freedom and liberation is tied to the freedom of everybody else. These are all going to be, truths that we are awakened to. I think on a practical level, so Pluto moves into Aquarius from March 23rd to June 11th. It just dips in there and then it retrogrades back into Capricorn. And so some of the things, so we get a little preview of a longer 20-year cycle. And so these are some of the things that we're going to have over that 20-year cycle. And we'll start hearing little rumblings about them. So I say here colonization of outer space. Well, Aquarius is space. It is the non-physical reality, or it's air, it's the sky. And so I do think we will have people trying to colonize Mars, or, if climate change, the effects of climate change make it more difficult to live here, I think we are going to be looking at where else we could set up, homesteads. I think, there could also be just more conversations about UFOs and extraterrestrials and the discovering of galaxies and planets that could support life. I think there's going to be a lot more of that, kind of awareness, and a lot more just coming out into the mainstream about these things that have sort of been, a little difficult to talk about in the past. This is a return of people coming into power. And we saw this Pluto was in Aquarius in the 1500s, the 1550s. And then we also had Pluto in Aquarius in the 1700s. And, we saw a lot of women's rights movements and women's rights at those times. Like, for example, in 1553, Mary I became the queen. Huge changes. The Reformation was taking place. And so we see a lot of those kinds of societal shifts. We're moving into an air epoch. And air is the element related to communication. It's related to, I think, translation and how we communicate with people from different languages. I wouldn't be surprised if we were using more like emojis, if we were moving beyond language and in how we communicate with one another. Or doing telepathy experiments, or teaching telepathy. I know this sounds really far-fetched, but if you go to Barnes and Noble, you'll see that there are mind reading games that are just sitting there on the shelves. And I think that is an indication that that's one of the places where we're moving. And I could see that happening in military operations and things where they're already using remote viewing and some of these types of skills. Technology is going to be a really big part of Pluto and Aquarius, both how we realize where we need to regulate it, as well as how we use it to move us forward, and to bring us together. We're going to see more of a trend toward communalism. And this means rethinking about power less in a hierarchical model and more in a collaborative model. And so, I don't think that it's going to be an overnight change where we're going to, do away with the president, or, no more CEOs of companies. But I think that we'll see more circle processes happening. We'll see more people coming with different perspectives, bringing different generations together. I think we're going to see those kinds of things. Less hierarchy, more community. Pluto in Capricorn, it dips into Capricorn just a little bit. So we're still finishing this cycle. And so we are going to, this is, many of us call this late capitalism. And so we're going to see the effects, the aspects of capitalism that need to be repaired, that need to be, where we can see the cracks in the foundation of those aspects of capitalism, or of that system, and heal them, repair them, or sometimes Pluto is smash them, dismantle them, reinvent them. And so I think we could see a real shift in terms of our economics. And I know that was one of the when cryptocurrency began and Bitcoin, and blockchain technology, it was a part of bringing more people, like giving more economic agency to people, bringing economic systems outside of banking and outside of these institutions. And we've seen ups and downs with that quite a bit, as many of you know. But now with Pluto entering Capricorn, it's like we're going to quickly realize a lot of what we saw in 2008 with big banks, big corporations being treated like individuals. I think we're going to see a lot of anything that we didn't take care of back then is going to come up. So Pluto leaves Capricorn with a bang. And then it moves into Aquarius. And so here we have the freedom to be ourselves, the freedom to create our own schedules, and the freedom to make choices. And so that is Pluto and Aquarius. This is the biggest, it's the biggest transit in our decade. And while we still are going back and forth between Aquarius and Capricorn this year, we get a preview of what's coming in 2024. Now let's talk about Jupiter. Jupiter is the largest planet in the solar system, and Jupiter kind of magnifies and blows up, like zooms in on any area of life that it represents, or any sign that it's in. And usually what happens is we see the very best and the very worst of that sign, sometimes the very worst before then we get to see the very best. Jupiter is in infinite possibilities. It is indulgence, it is generosity, it is manifested dreams, and it doesn't have many boundaries. Jupiter is in Aries, and at the time when Jupiter entered Aries, it's been moving back and forth through Aries this year. And each time, and when it first entered Aries, we saw issues with gun violence. We were looking at the war in Ukraine. We saw fires and weapons and how we're protecting ourselves. And we saw, heroes protecting their country in these violent situations, and protecting the rights of people who can't advocate for themselves. And so Aries brings all of that into our awareness. Aries, I want to talk about Aries as a mythological character. He was the god of war, but he was also the protector of agriculture. And so, when we're looking at Jupiter and Aries, we are looking at what are we protecting? We're protecting our beliefs and our ideology. That's what Jupiter represents. And so a lot of these mass shootings that we've seen, unfortunately and tragically, while Jupiter has been in Aries, have been about those ideological, either conspiracies or these ideological fabrications about that involve spirituality, that involve our sense of what's right or what's wrong, not ours, but those who have been arrested or sentenced for committing those acts of violence. Now, the good news, I think, is that we are at the tail end of Jupiter and Aries. And so I think we have a real opportunity for some practical gun reform. And I know this is a controversial topic, so I won't get political, but I think we have a real opportunity to be rethinking how we look at the ways that we protect ourselves. And And I think we're also going to be looking at, I think that there could be some peace building efforts in during this time as well. Just to give you a little bit of timing context, Jupiter was in Aries from May 10th of 2022 to October 27th, and then it went retrograde back into Pisces, and it goes into Aries again from December 20th to May 16th of 2023. And so I think during that end period, really April and May, I think we have some real opportunities for looking at how we get out of how we end the war in Ukraine, how we prevent a nuclear attack. And I think there are opportunities for us all to come together to realize that we're not just protecting our own little individual countries, but that we're really protecting the whole when we make some of these decisions. And then Jupiter moves into Taurus. Now, Taurus is an earth sign. It's very grounded. Taurus relates to the five senses. What makes it wonderful to be alive in a human body? It's design, it's art, it's harmony, it's stability. It's also economic stability and economic growth. Jupiter is going to be in Taurus from May 16th of 2023 to May 25th of 2024. And here are some of the things that we can expect. First of all, we're going to really understand the value of things. So this is moving us away from a consumer culture and more into being very discerning about how we're spending our money. I think we could see some minimalism and some of those movements. We'll probably see more luxury items being purchased, art, things that beautify the home. Even like architecture. We'll see big movements in food. So foodies, you're going to love this. You're going to absolutely love this. Our restaurants are going to be doing more interesting experiments. They're going to be offering more kinds of delicious, rich food. So probably looking at health in a different way. We're going to be seeing pleasure as sacred. And so really understanding pleasure as not something that needs to be judged or shame-based, but something that we celebrate. And by pleasure, I'm talking about the pleasure of the physical senses. So things that taste good, things that smell good, perfumes. This is a great time if you work in any kind of industry that involves beauty and fashion and art and sensual experiences, massage. This is your time. And so pleasure really being that which makes us feel alive in our bodies. We have a reconnection to the earth as well. And so I think there are some real opportunities here for addressing, waste and toxicity in the environment. I think we're going to see a trend toward preserving natural spaces and building parks and rewilding land. Also, I'm seeing food forests and all kinds of conversation about regenerative farming and agriculture, and building food forests in our local parks. I think we're going to see, hopefully we'll see some of that, and getting children involved in agriculture. Taurus is a slow-moving sign. So think about the bull. The bull takes a very practical approach. It doesn't move unless it really, really wants to move, or unless it's provoked. And so anything that we're creating, Jupiter relates to manifestation. It relates to how we materialize our goals. And so anything that you deeply desire, move forward at a practical step-by-step approach. Stay determined. It's not a time when we have a lot of lucky breaks. It's more of a time when it's like we create our own luck by staying the course, by not giving up, by being really dedicated to what we desire. Jupiter also has a 12-year cycle. And so think about what was happening 12 years ago for you. And those are some of the things that are happening right now. That you'll see, it's almost like with Jupiter transits, we spiral back. And so when you have Jupiter, so every 12 years, Jupiter makes one full rotation and comes back to the same place it was in your chart. And so that's often when we have new growth, new opportunities. A lot of times it's a job change or a relationship change, something that is sprouting in our lives. And then it comes full circle at this time. And there can be career changes, there can be moves, things like that are happening, especially if you have Taurus placements. So if your sun, your moon, or your rising are in Taurus, then this is going to be especially an opportunistic time for you. The North Node and the South Node are also changing signs this year. The North Node and South Node are always opposite one another. And the North Node is our path of purpose, and it's the area that's just beyond our comfort zone. It's where we find fulfillment. In a transiting context, it shows us what we're prioritizing, where all of our attention is going. And just to give you a little context, as an example, in 2020, the North Node was in the sign of Cancer. Cancer relates to the home, to baking, to the family. And think about what we were all doing in 2020. We were confined to our homes. And so it's one example of how the North Node aims all of our attention in one way. It's been in the sign of Taurus. And so we've had, supply chain has been an issue, how we get the things we have, how we spend our money, how we earn money, prioritizing our sense of balance with how we make money. Those have all been focal points, and we're still in this transit. But when the North Node moves into Aries this year, we get our focus starts to shift. I think of the North Node as like our North Star. If we're following it, then we're aimed in a direction that aligns to our sense of purpose. And the South Node is exactly opposite. And the nodes, astrologically, astronomically, are points, invisible points that relate to the alignment of the sun, the orbital path of the sun, the moon, and the earth. And so we have, I think of them in terms of as what we are bringing in from our subconscious and unconscious realms, and how we are integrating those things into our material, physical, conscious experience. So it's really about what we're calling into form in our lives. The South Node is that unconscious aspect of ourselves. It's the past. It's what we're healing and working through, but it's also familiarity. So I think about it in terms of what we inherit from our families, what we bring in, even the skills and the talents, the patterns, ways of being, where we can get stuck, also where we meet resistance, and it's where we grow. The eclipses line up, all eclipses line up with the North and South Node. They're full moons or new moons that are within a certain degree, 18 degrees of the North or South Node. And so all eclipses shake us up, kind of loosen us, so that we let go of our grip. The ego lets go of our grip, of anything that that we're clinging to, that is not aligned to our path. And then we are left with no choice but then to go fully forward into our purpose. And this is why eclipses can feel so intense. They catalyze change. So the North Node in Aries is the sign of independence. It's the sign of the pioneer and the initiator. And so things we're working on with the North Node in Aries are confidence, self-love versus codependence. How do we relate to ourselves and others? How do we love ourselves in order to be better for our relationships, or to show up in a healthier way in our relationships? This transit lasts until January 11th of 2025. And Saturn and Neptune are both going to be meeting up with the North Node in 2025. So that's a one of those big shifts, and it's after the North Node enters Pisces. But this is that these transits are 2023 kind of builds us up to that conjunction. So 2025 and 2026 are powerful years. And so right now we are really navigating the relationships in all of their forms. And so I think we'll see a lot of relationship questions, a lot of relationship changes, people kind of moving in and out of relationships in a more conscious way. I think we will also see just a whole new movement in people embracing being single. I read an article recently that more and more married couples are deciding to live separately, and that is the way that they're preserving their marriage. And so these are I think we can expect more of these kinds of shifts as we move into this this transit. One thing I wanted to note is that when the North Node is in Aries, right around that in July, it's going to form a square aspect to Pluto at 29 degrees of Capricorn. And 29 degrees is what we call a critical degree. It's a degree that really activates the potential for movement and the potential for change. It's not comfortable at all. And so, so July and August, actually just the middle of July to the end of August, or to the beginning of August, is one of those hot spots in the year where our relationships are going to be, in the forefront of our minds, and where we're working through what Pluto is. Pluto is the past, the karma, the psychological stuff that we bring into our relationships. So this is a great time if you wanted to get away with your partner, or if you wanted to plan, a retreat for yourself, something to really use the potential of this transit to go deep, to do some real personal healing, to deepen your own spiritual awareness, and just a time of incredible healing. The North Node brings us to the eclipses. Eclipses tell us the larger storylines of our lives, as I said, and they really show what areas of life are being shaken up. And so when you think about the eclipses, think about, if you know the houses in your chart, whatever house an eclipse is in, this is where you're going to see movement. And often not right there at the eclipse. I find that the effects of eclipses last about 3 months, depending on how long the eclipse is. So think about where Libra, we start with Aries. We have, they're kind of moving over Aries, and Aries, Libra, and Taurus, Scorpio. So we have both axis lines represented. But let's start with this April eclipse. Now, this April eclipse is wild. This is a wild eclipse, and I'll tell you why. I'm pretty like, I'm kind of blown away by this one. In fact, it's a total wild card. The eclipses can be wild cards where you don't always know what's going to take place. And so sometimes, as astrologers, as an astrologer, I'll say, here are the spectrum of possibilities that could happen, but eclipses want to surprise us. And so this one is interesting because we talked about how that 29 degree of a cardinal sign is such an important degree. This is the sun and the moon are meeting together at the 29th degree of Aries. This is a degree that is really, looking back at it, like, the sun loves to be in a cardinal sign. And so it doesn't quite want to move forward. So we have a little bit of a stubborn streak with this eclipse. But we have Uranus right there next to Mercury, and kind of pushing us forward. And so this is one of those transits where it's like we cannot resist the impulse to move ahead or to move in a different direction, no matter how comfortable and cozy we are. The other thing is that this eclipse, it highlights Eris, which is a little dwarf planet. And Eris is a planet, I like to think of Eris as the goddess of discord for progressive change. And in 2020, Eris and Pluto were doing this dance where they were challenging one another and for the purpose of refining and reshaping aspects of our culture that were not progressing as quickly as Eris as culture wanted them to progress. And so Jupiter stands right here next to Eris, highlighting some of that tension, bringing it back up to the surface and saying, okay, it's time to heal. And so one of the ways that I think we'll experience this in our personal lives is we'll experience the last straw that allows us to break free from an unhealthy habit or situation, a burst of courage that sends us forth on a new path. This is a period of movement, and it's very, it's like there's nothing holding us back. There are no planets going retrograde. Everything is moving forward. And so if we resist change, it's going to be very uncomfortable. But if we open our arms, enter into a place of surrender, and say, let's go, I'm in it for the adventure, then life unfolds in a miraculous way. And I love this as we move into the summer. Now, the next eclipse on May 5th is basically a rewind of what was happening on November 8th. So think about what was happening for you between really November 8th and December 15th or 16th. We're still kind of in that eclipse, we're in the aftermath of the eclipse as I'm recording this right now. But this is, we have Uranus and the sun standing very close together, and Uranus loves a surprise. It loves oh yeah, you think it was going that way? Well, it's going this way. Now, one thing I'm really concerned about with this eclipse is, this eclipse can shake things up. The sun and Uranus are both in earth signs, the sign of Taurus. We might see some earthquake potential. We might see some volcanoes. We definitely did with this last one. And so these are some of the things that we can expect. And I'm even, I live here in California, so I'm really sensitive to earthquakes here. But I think 2023, the spring of 2023, could be a hot spot for some of those kinds of things.
The other thing I'll just bring in real quickly is that by now we have Saturn in Pisces, and so some of the healing that we're doing, some of the healthcare changes, some of that is starting to kind of come full circle, or to come up to the surface. We're starting those conversations. And then I'll also add that there's a lucky surprise with this one. So you could have a total stroke of luck. We have Venus in a really friendly sextile relationship with Jupiter. And so, so surprises all around. Then this is the first eclipse on October 14th where the North Node is in Aries. So this is a whole new nodal cycle. The North Node here is conjunct Eris. And so I think with this eclipse, we're going to, that some of the themes that we'll be looking at are women's rights, reproductive rights, back in the conversation. This is a really political solar eclipse. And what I love about it is we have Chiron, Chiron represents, the aspects of our culture that we are healing by bringing compassion and love to those spaces, by being aware of the ways that we have hurt others or hurt ourselves, and offering sincere apologies. And so, Chiron in Aries is opposite the new moon. It's opposite Mercury. And so this is one of those transits that brings all of our pain up to the surface so that we feel it, we heal it, and then we can empty ourselves of resentment or of hurt, or, because we're talking about Aries, it could be conflict that then leads to new awarenesses in our relationships. So Chiron's influence allows us to heal personally, and also to go back into the aspects of our culture that need to be healed, bring things to the surface. And we have Jupiter and Taurus really grounding any of that practice. And finally, we have the last eclipse on October 28th. And these two eclipses, the October eclipses, close out the year. And so they're pretty important in terms of looking at the themes for the overall end of the year, the last quarter of the year. We have the sun back in Scorpio right next to Mercury and Mars. This is an action-packed eclipse. We've got Jupiter, Mars opposite Jupiter. So this is a fiery eclipse where we're still doing some of that healing that we talked about, but there's more tension in terms of instead of coming together or finding ways to work through those emotions, we are maybe pulling apart, creating boundaries, and through that being able to come together in new ways. We're going to see these eclipses play out, especially in our personal relationships. And this one in particular, it's relationships with others and partners, so business partners, anyone that you share ownership with, or that you share your life with in a very significant way. And we'll close with our retrogrades. So Mercury retrograde, we start the year and end the year with Mercury retrograde. And Mercury is also retrograde from April 21st to May 14th, August 23rd to September 15th. And then again, we close out the year in 2023. Mercury is retrograde in Earth signs this year, meaning that it's a year for really being practical about how we're organizing our time, how we're organizing ourselves, and creating sort of a business plan, if you will, or a really clear direction for how we move forward in our relationships, for what we're creating in our homes. This is a year for getting serious about aspects, things that we want to study, or skills that we want to develop. And it's slow and steady wins the race. That is one thing that we need to think about when we're looking at, especially the spring, the summer, and the fall of this year. Everything kind of slows down a little bit after April 21st. And so this Mercury retrograde pulls us back. We start out a little slow with Mercury retrograde, but then all the planets are going direct from January 22nd to April 21st. So we've got fast, rapid action. That is the time to make anything happen, or to, launch a business, or to anything that you're doing that's taking a leap of faith. Aim for the first quarter of the year, because this first Mercury retrograde slows everything down. And it's that time when you're looking back and saying, did I do the right thing? Did I really want this? And we can reassess. We start the year with Mars retrograde, and we're in the middle of that right now as we record this. And Mars retrograde is a time when we are internalizing, our sense of what we're passionate about, of what we really deeply desire. And so it's kind of a time when we have one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake pedal, where it's like we know where we want to go, but we can't quite get motivated to go there. And so really just give yourself permission in these first few weeks of the year to take it easy, to take it slow. We're not going to really feel that sense of the new year until January 22nd. We also have Venus retrograde this year, and Venus goes retrograde from July 22nd to September 3rd. And this is one of those hotspot times for relationships. And so if you're thinking about planning a wedding, or you're wanting to, to start online dating, or anything like that, this is a time when relationships are going to be a little bit more, they're going to feel the tension. There's going to be perhaps reflecting back on the past, looking at who you've been in different relationships. So we have a little bit of extra introspection when it comes to all things relationships. But Venus is also the planet of our self-worth and of our economic stability. It's the planet of our finances. And so all of the hotspot topics in our lives, money, personal value, self-worth, relationships, these all fall under Venus's domain. So I find that Venus retrograde times are excellent for healing any kind of wound to the self-esteem. This one is going to be in the sign of Leo. And so we have an opportunity to really express ourselves. So this could be a good time to get involved in a creative hobby, to find some sort of outlet for your calming down that inner voice. Venus retrograde is also a time when we want to be careful about making any kind of major style decisions or any kind of major changes to the decor in our homes, especially if you have Leo placements, Leo planets, because we can change our minds. It's like we tap into shadows during retrograde periods, but those shadows sometimes want to go back into the shadow when the retrograde cycle ends. And so that can happen during retrogrades. I always say you don't have to, people ask, should I avoid signing contracts? Should I avoid, buying a car? I always think that we have to live our lives. And often, if we get married with Venus retrograde, there is a symbolic resonance about why we chose that to begin with. But if you are planning a wedding, or if you are looking at, something like that, sometimes astrologers advise us to avoid those dates for planning any kind of business, launch of a business, any kind of relationship commitment, any sort of birth date that you can choose. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to avoid that Venus retrograde. But like I said, I am of the belief that we live our lives, and I've made major decisions during retrogrades that I have not regretted. Bought houses during Mercury retrograde, bought cars and computers. We have to live our lives. I'm going to close off today with just a few significant dates, and these are ones that you can put on your calendar. Just to summarize for you and give you, just real practical ways to use this information that we covered today. So from January 22nd to April 21st, all planets are moving direct. Uranus stations direct on the 22nd. And so this is a time when we start right out, this is really when the year begins. And we've got some luck, actually, and especially from January 22nd to February 1st. That's a great time to be launching anything, to be sending out an email, sending out a book proposal, starting a house shopping adventure, anything that requires a lot of fast, direct motion. That would be the time I would recommend. Then on February 15th, Venus, I love this because it's right after Valentine's Day. So Venus meets up with Neptune. And this is one of my favorite transits that happens once a year. And it is highly romantic. It's a time when you can just look beyond your differences. You can see the very best in people and in your partner. And so it's a time when we can really come together in beautiful ways. And because it's happening the day after Valentine's Day, I think it gives us an ability to, patch up or repair any fractures in our relationships before we get into the North Node in Aries. And so this is a connecting point. Plan a date night. On March 2nd, Venus meets up with Jupiter. And this is what I think of as like the luckiest transit of the year. Or the Sun conjunct Jupiter is the luckiest, but Venus conjunct Jupiter is pretty close. When these two planets come together, it's just joyful. We want to have a good time. It's a great time for a get together or a party. It's a great time for any kind of creative outlet that you want to do with others. It's a good time to just connect with people. And so that's March 2nd. And then April 11th, the Sun meets up with Jupiter. And this is one of my favorite transits of the year as well, because regardless of what's happening in our lives, we have hope. And we can see a pathway forward if we are willing to see everything. And sometimes that path forward means that we are required to step away from or create some distance from people in our lives who don't encourage us or who bring us down, or we're stepping away from spinning our wheels, working ineffectively, doing busy work, and so the Sun conjunct Jupiter, it shifts gears for us. So if you've been looking for a job and you haven't had any luck, or if you've been in a situation where you're just stuck, this transit gives you a life raft. It opens a new door. And so I really like this transit. This is also a good one if you're starting a business, if you're taking a trip, if you're planning anything big, this is a good day to set aside for that. July 21st, this is this Sun opposite Pluto. Now we're kind of getting into some of the dark mystery transits, or the transits that bring us into our power and allow us to express the fullness of our power. And the Sun opposite Pluto is that. And in particular, the Sun shines a light on any situations in our lives where we have felt powerless, or where, and so this means, like, even if you feel powerless over the weather or over social issues that are we have no control, seemingly no control over, or in a relationship, if you find yourself in a constant power struggle, this is one of those transits that reverses that allows you to change gears. And sometimes it just makes you aware of the ways in which you don't have power in certain situations. So in these last three, recognize that sometimes anger is the most productive emotion, in that it allows us to spark the fire that's necessary for creating change in our lives. And so that's what we have with these last ones. Mars opposite Neptune, Mars opposite Uranus. These are times when we are, we are on the heels of that Sun opposite Pluto, where, this is August through November. We're moving into the period of eclipses, and so things are getting a little bit activated toward the fall, and really the October and November. So from September to November, it's like things are stirring, and it might not feel as comfortable as the earlier part of the year, but it's like they're stirring in a way that gives you real creative potency, and that will allow you to knock out boulders in your way, to clear the path forward, and prepare you for some of the exciting shifts that are happening in 2024 to 2026. So that is it. I think we covered all bases. And if you have any questions, or if you would like to reflect anything that I might have missed, here is my website. You can reach me here. And thank you so much.